What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the FF Ballbusters podcast. Thank you for joining us. My name is Eric. That's my co host, Will. And today we're going to be breaking down some risers and fallers from last week's Senior Bowl and also some honorable mentions from the Shrine Bowl. So we're talking Dynasty risers and fallers for you guys to keep your eyes on. But real quickly, before we get into that, Will, do you have anything to say to the people?
Absolutely, guys. Make sure you're doing all that great YouTube stuff when you watch the video. We checked our stats, and about 85% of you guys aren't subscribed to the channel if you're watching this. So, if you're liking the content, you like everything we have to bring you guys in terms of fantasy football and the information, hit that sub button, hit that notification bell. That way, you're notified every single time we drop a new video. And with that being said, we got an exciting one, so I'm excited to get into this one.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's jump right in. We can start with the quarterback position and we'll talk risers first. Will, who do you want to bring up?
We're gonna bring up the guy I feel like everybody's been talking about for this game, Mr. Spencer Rattler. Just a guy who it's funny because it started off a little bit negative. I feel like he came in and they thought he was smaller than he was actually listed as. He's listed as 6'1", but he came in at like 6 and eighth of an inch, something like that. So a little bit smaller, but he was already kind of on the smaller side, so no one was really perturbed by that size. It's just a little bit shorter than he thought. But nobody else really boosted their draft stock, at least at the quarterback position, than Spencer Rattler did this weekend. There were a lot of questions going into it. Same questions that have already kind of been there throughout his college career, through maturity, decision making, things like that, leadership. But he kind of came out there and showed that he was able to put everything together and was able to raise his draft stock. I feel like quite a bit. He's a guy we didn't really have a whole lot on our radars, kind of wrote him off. And this weekend, he's making us take another look at him. But what do you think about Spencer?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. And I think that's a really good point where like people were looking for that leadership and maturity out of him, especially considering where he was at, early in his career. So that was good to see. But also, I thought he had good ball placement, timing. He wasn't perfect, but also, like you mentioned, the rest of the quarterback group just wasn't that impressive this past week.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought he kind of stood out from the group. Um, but he might be the only riser, kind of on that same in that same vein. So we can go to fallers right away. I thought Bo Nix might have struggled the most out of any quarterback here, or at least compared to expectation. He struggled with accuracy and touch, especially when throwing deep. And that accuracy, was supposed to be his calling card. So it was definitely concerning to see that he was having issues with that. I do want to make it clear that like it's tough on these quarterbacks coming to these all-star games because they're working with receivers they've never thrown to before. It's hard to get that timing and chemistry with these guys. Um, but yeah, I just felt like he struggled more than any of the other quarterbacks there. He was starting to get that, top 15 NFL draft buzz. I don't really think that that's going to happen now.
Nah, I definitely agree. I think something that we were looking forward to seeing from him was the deep ball for sure. Like he has been really good at throwing that this year, and they kind of all seem to fall a little bit flat compared to what we're used to seeing. And like you said, it's one thing when it comes down to like chemistry with receivers, but it's another thing when it comes down to just making the throws. And he just didn't look super comfortable out there making a lot of throws. He did have one deep pass to Devontae Walker get dropped. So that
Yeah.
was, it would have been a tough catch as well. I don't want to put everything on Tez, but I do feel like if that one had connected, we may be talking a little bit differently about him, but it didn't. So, we're here where we're at. I still think Bo Nix is going to end up somewhere in the first round. I don't think this is something that's going to completely tank him, but again, I think the combine is going to end up being huge for him in terms of his draft
Yep.
stock. It's going to be the last opportunity he's really got to raise his stock because he wasn't impressive this weekend, like you said, like we had hoped he would be.
Yeah. No,
And
I would agree with that.
yeah. And moving into the next player, we got Mr. Michael Penix Jr., who also struggled a bit. Something that we saw a lot was when it came down to pressure, he wasn't great at really handling that. A lot of running out of the side of the pocket, a lot of off balance throws, stuff that just didn't really connect. Not really what we're used to seeing from him in terms of just poise, really. His mechanics didn't really seem too great. Honestly, between him and Bo Nix, they were the two biggest names out there at the quarterback position. And it's weird because they weren't the most impressive out there. And that's not really what you want to see out of the guys that, like we said, we feel like they're going to get drafted in the first round at some point. They just didn't really come out there and do too much.
Exactly. Yeah, it was just a disappointment. Like Penix, I didn't think had a bad week necessarily, but those two guys you expected to really shine and rise above the rest of the group, and we just didn't get that. They didn't deliver. Like you mentioned, I think Penix his mechanics under pressure really seem to break down, and that's something that we saw a little bit on tape of him at Washington as well. So that wasn't too surprising, but we hoped that we would see better or an improvement on that, and that's just not what we got. I think Nix is probably still going to find himself in the first round, like you mentioned, but maybe a little bit later than we initially thought. I think Penix is probably going to be like an early day two guy.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know that either of these guys boosted their draft stock at all this past week. And then just some kind of less dynasty relevant names, but people that we should throw in there. Michael Pratt and Joe Milton also had really tough weeks, especially Joe Milton. He was so woefully inaccurate all week. Like he's got a cannon of an arm, but it doesn't really matter when you can't connect.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I feel like, as time's going along, that, Michael Penix towards the back end of that tier, it's just getting a little bit better and better, to be honest,
Yeah.
because I don't know.
But yeah, I agree with you there. Let's move on to the running back position. We'll go back to the positive end of the spectrum and start with risers. The first guy that I have on here is going to be Marshawn Lloyd. He looked really, really elusive in the open field, which again just kind of confirms our priors on what we've seen on tape from him, and also showed off some good ball skills and route running ability as well. I think he's probably, we're going to talk about quite a few big risers in this group, but he's one of them in terms of where he went from prior to this week to now after. I think he was initially projected as a sixth round pick, and now it's looking like a fourth round. So that's going to be huge for him and also probably pretty relevant for your dynasty rookie drafts.
Absolutely. He's one of those guys I'm really excited to see in the combine because I think he's another one who has a really big opportunity to raise his stock quite a bit because he just looked really good at just everything you want to see in a fantasy running back in terms of elusiveness in the open field, being able to catch the ball, just good ball skills, route running ability, just everything that you would really want to see that makes an impact on the fantasy stat sheet. He was able to do it. So if he's able to raise his stock even more, I'm pretty excited about Marshawn Lloyd at the next level. Just seeing what he was able to do out there on the field.
Absolutely.
And then moving on to the next one is a guy who Eric actually put on our radar. So super shout out to him. Mr. Ray Davis was actually out there. He was balling. Came in weighing at 228 at 5'8". So definitely like a bowling ball out there. But even at that
Yeah.
weight, he was still very explosive. He looked like one of the best running backs out there on the field. At any point he touched the ball, he was able to make something happen with it. And he was just better than expected as a pass catcher too. But he's your boy. I'm gonna let you talk a little bit about Ray Davis because I wouldn't even know who he was without you in this game. So
Yeah, man. I mean, all of what you said, I completely agree with. The size is obviously there. It didn't seem like that size limited him athletically. You mentioned the pass catching was more impressive than even I expected. He was just my favorite tape evaluation out of the entire group, and so to see him continue to succeed amongst some of his peers, some of the best at the running back position that went to the Senior Bowl was really good to see. I am really curious, like we've mentioned with a lot of these guys, how he's going to test at the combine, because obviously they're not running 40s or doing agility drills, and I am curious to see if he maintains that weight and if he does maintain that weight of 228, if he still looks good in those drills. But either way, I think he boosted his draft stock quite a bit, and he's going to be one of my favorite late round steals.
absolutely agree. And the next guy we want to talk about here, we got Mr. Dylan Lobby. I don't know how it's pronounced. He's a guy I didn't really know a whole lot about until this game came up, but he's been hailed as sort of a pass catching specialist from a small school, but he kind of put himself on the radar a little bit. I don't really know a whole lot about this guy. 68 receptions this past year with one game where he caught 12 passes for 295 and 2 touchdowns. Yeah, definitely a pass catching specialist there. Do you know more about this guy, Eric? So you can give the people more context because I'm a bit of a casual when it comes to him.
Well, I mean, I think most people are. He went to New Hampshire and he's a white running back, so not on a lot of people's radars prior to this week.
Real lunch pail
But
guy.
yeah, real lunch pail guy, first guy in, last guy out type energy. but no, he really proved himself this week. He's got decent size. I think he's around 210. He looked physical, and then obviously, as we mentioned, a guy that caught 68 receptions. He had a game of almost 300 receiving yards. He looked dynamic in the receiving game, and actually ran some drills with the wide receivers against cornerbacks and DBs. Didn't look too out of place. So I think if he can find a foothold, if he can find a team that's willing to draft him and give him opportunity, he's absolutely got a path to fantasy relevance. It's just whether or not he gets that capital and opportunity that's going to be the biggest hurdle for him.
Absolutely, because like you said, just having that pass catching role as a running back in the NFL, it can be very, very valuable. We've had guys make a whole career off of that. Shout out Rex Burkhead, actually, who just retired. But he is one of those guys who's sort of a pass catching specialist type of guy coming in. That
Or even a little Danny Woodhead action.
Ooh, Danny Woodhead. That's a name I haven't heard in a long
Yeah,
time, but
man.
absolutely, 100%.
That's that's the comp that I've heard kind of thrown around for this guy. We need to figure out how to pronounce his last name correctly. I've heard it multiple ways, but hopefully we'll get some confirmation on that soon. But Dylan Laub or Lobby or whatever it is, keep him on your radar. But let's move on to, well, we don't even really have to move on to it. I listed fallers on the list because we're doing risers and fallers for every position. I didn't really have a faller for the running backs. I felt like everybody was pretty solid, and I felt like it would be unfair to label anybody a true faller. One guy that I kind of hoped might provide some splash plays for us this week is Kamani Vidal out of Troy, another really under the radar guy, but had some hype coming into the week. He was fine, just didn't really wow anybody.
I agree. I feel like they were all pretty solid. So, like you said, nobody that really hurt themselves this week. It's just a lot of people who at least put themselves on the radar as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to the wide receiver position. We'll start with the risers as we have been. You want to talk about Lad McConkey, who really
Absolutely.
solidified himself?
Lad McConkey came out there and he was balling the entire time that I feel like they were at the Senior Bowl from the first practice up until the game. And he was just better than we thought he was going to be. Obviously, in terms of route running and just separation, it's two things that stood out to us on film, but it's also just two things that absolutely shined through this weekend. It felt like he was always open. And just being able to leverage the DBs and manipulate the DBs to, you know, get more separation is something that he was able to do very well. And he didn't really just get open. He was able to make some pretty impressive catches as well. So just showing off some athleticism to go along with it. Like we had talked about, he's a lot more athletic than people give him credit for. And he was able to show that out there on the field. And I feel like he was able to raise his draft stock quite a bit. Where do you feel like Lad McConkey, in terms of like his performance this weekend, where do you feel like he landed at?
In terms of draft capital.
Yeah.
So prior to the week, he was getting most of the mocks that I saw had him in the mid to late second. I've seen a couple since then where he finds himself in the back end of the first. I've seen him in that like 30 to 32 spot, whether it be the Chiefs. Um,
Ooh.
well, I guess the Chiefs would probably be the only ones looking for a wide receiver there. So I've seen him to the Chiefs at 31, and I've seen him up at 28 to the Bills as well. So if he can find himself in the back end of the first after this week, that would be quite the money making performance for him.
Absolutely. That would be honestly those two pairings kind of sound amazing, the Bills and the Chiefs, but obviously I feel like anybody would be excited to land at the Bills and the Chiefs too. So I don't want to get too much into that, but that's actually very exciting right there.
Yeah. And then, so Lad McConkey was incredibly impressive, but really all three of these guys that we're going to talk about as wide receiver risers were great in terms of separation, route running, and stuff like that. Roman Wilson was another one in that same boat. He was completely uncoverable this week. Nobody could touch him. He won basically every rep that he took. He went up against Quinyon Mitchell, who was probably the biggest defensive riser at the Senior Bowl this week. He's another guy that went from not, I wouldn't say unknown, but probably day two guy into first round buzz type territory
Hmm.
as a cornerback. Them two faced up quite a few times this week, and it seemed like Roman Wilson had his number each time. It was a good battle, but Roman was always able to get open. He made some impressive catches. Um, so yeah, I think he's probably another nominee for biggest riser out of the position here or out of the position group, where he went from probably I think like sixth round projected draft capital all the way up to now getting third round buzz. That's a huge difference for Roman Wilson, and definitely somebody that needs to be on your dynasty radar now.
Yeah, that's a gigantic leap. Love to see that for the guy. And then moving on to the next one, we got Mr. Ricky Pearsall, as you had kind of alluded to. Just similar to what we talked about with the other two, he was able to just get open pretty much at will. He was out there, one of the best out there. Wasn't quite as impressive as the other two, but still pretty solid. Good pacing through his routes, everything like that. And just stuff that we had kind of seen on his tape was able to shine through in this game as well. So just showed a lot of consistency too. And he may have potentially taken himself from a day three guy to maybe even a day two guy, and with even more room to still rise up the board. So Ricky Pearsall definitely went out there and did his thing.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move on to the fallers category. The first guy that we have listed on here is going to be Xavier Legette, a guy that we've both talked about in this light. This wasn't unexpected to us, at least. Do you want to kind of get into what we saw from him this past week?
We have gotten some heat for this guy in the comments, and he came in and did exactly what we thought he was going to do. He came
Yeah.
in first. He measured 2 inches shorter than he was listed at 6'1". That's the first strike, and he just wasn't able to get open this whole week. His ability to separate just was not there. These are things we talked about that were kind of weaknesses in his game that kind of really got accented this week, and just
Yeah.
in a and when you're doing separation one-on-one drills and you're not able to separate, that's really bad because that's literally what that drill is made for. You know, you should be able to get open on those. You're the wide receiver.
Yeah.
The drill is made for you.
Exactly.
If you're not getting open there, you're not going to get open in a game. That's just pretty much how that works. Um, his stock is definitely going to take a hit here. It's just the weaknesses that he had were definitely accented this week. They just were brought out into the light 100%.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add, but like you mentioned, wide receivers are so heavily favored in these one-on-ones, and so for him to not be able to shake loose of any of these corners or DBs this week was really concerning. I think to his credit, he did improve each day, but it was never impressive. He never looked as advertised, and also, like you mentioned, the measurables just weren't there. So I think all in all, a disappointing performance for Xavier Legette. Probably still going to be like a mid round two pick. But any of that talk about the beginning of round two potentially sneaking into the back end of round one, I think that's gone.
Absolutely.
Um, and then another guy, this one's really disappointing for me. Devontae Walker, also in the fallers list. He was somebody that I had high hopes for. Route running ability and separation throughout the week was inconsistent. You know, he had flashes. He had times where he was able to get open, but couldn't do it consistently. We knew that he was going to be more of a vertical threat than anywhere else, but I did hope that we were going to see a little bit more polish from that kind of short and intermediate area from him. We just didn't really get that. And then he really struggled at the catch point. Like you mentioned earlier with the Bo Nix throw, he had some devastating drops that he really
Yeah.
should have brought in. And like, drops aren't a sticky stat, but especially in these all-star game environments where, you're not really getting hit, nobody's being that physical. Like, you got to come up with these balls. This is basically just walk through and he's dropping stuff all over the place. So that was not a good thing to see from Tez.
Yeah, it hurt to see a guy that we feel like kind of had all the tools, not really be able to put it all together out there on the field. But he still
Yeah,
got some time to, raise his stock, and he still could be a difference maker at the next level. But he's got some stuff. He's got some maturing to do as a receiver, honestly, just to get there.
absolutely. All right, so let's move on to our last position group here at the tight end. We'll start with the risers. Shout out to the guy that was in our comments telling us we need to learn ball and figure out who Theo Johnson is. We found out who Theo Johnson is. He had himself a good week here at the Senior Bowl. Uh, I'm not entirely convinced that either of the guys that we're going to talk about here as risers are going to be fantasy relevant in terms of dynasty leagues, but I think they made themselves some money in terms of draft capital and what they can bring to NFL teams. So you want to talk about what you saw from Theo this week?
Yeah, Theo is just the guy who I feel like he's very athletic, 6'6", 260 as well, so good size to go along with that. He had solid hands and pretty good blocking ability, but in terms of just him as a player, like you said, I don't feel like this is going to move the meter a ton. I feel like he would go to any NFL team, be a tight end 2, maybe even tight end 3, but he is going to be able to make it to an NFL roster. He has the tools that the team would be looking for. You know what I mean? So when it comes to his performance this weekend, he was good. It raised his stock, may even get drafted as opposed to undrafted that he was looking at status, but not a super meter mover, but able to at least get things done out there on the field.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there. And then similar boat here with Jared Wiley out of TCU. Both really physically imposing guys. I think he put his strength and physicality on display this week, which was important for him. A similar situation that we just talked about, where I think he's going to be more valuable to an NFL roster than he's going to be to your dynasty roster. But I think he did show some decent hands. So he's not going to be a complete liability in that regard. Just somebody that we should probably put on your radar. But again, I'm not too concerned with either of these guys.
Absolutely. And then moving over to the fallers at the tight end position, the only guy we got really listed here is Jaheim Bell, which isn't necessarily a faller. It's just looking at him lined up next to all those other tight ends out there, you could tell that, the measurables weren't there in terms of him being smaller than everybody else. But we kind of weren't looking at him as kind of that blocking tight end or physical tight end anyways. We were looking at him as somebody that the team needs to draft and be more creative with, get him out in open space. He works a lot better as a receiver, possibly even as somebody who can just get the ball handed off to him as well. So he's not someone we were really looking for to be that huge, imposing tight end threat. But at the same time, it was a little disappointing to see him, next to those other guys and be like, damn, that's a guy we're going to draft at tight end. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, as Cam Jordan said about Kyle Pitts, he's a little light in the ass for a tight end. So I don't know. It's a little difficult to get exciting about him. But like we said before, if a team can draft him and get creative with him and find some more solidified creative role for him in an offense, he can still find a lot of success at the NFL level. It's just who drafts him and who's going to be able to do that. It stands to be seen.
Yeah, that's the risk that you're going to run with Jaheim Bell. I think he has the upside. He's got that route running ability. He's a good receiver. He's got the athleticism, but he's undersized and not a great blocker. So we'll have to see how NFL teams actually value him. Like you mentioned, he's like 3 to 4 inches shorter and 10 to 15 pounds lighter than basically every other tight end that was at the Senior Bowl. So probably unfair to label him a faller. Just didn't really stack up size-wise next to the other guys that were there. I think that'll probably do it for the Senior Bowl. And then just real quickly, as we round this thing out, I do want to mention some guys from the Shrine Bowl. Both wide receivers, Malik Washington and Taj Washington from Virginia and USC respectively. Both guys that are route running savants that can get open at will, and that, at least in Malik Washington's case, had fantastic college production this past year. Taj Washington was decent as well, but that USC offense in general was kind of shaky and all over the place. So he didn't put up the same production that Malik did, but I was really impressed with their showings at the Shrine Bowl.
I would agree. I didn't watch too much of the Shrine Bowl, so I got to get caught up on that one a little bit. But those are two names I have seen pop up on a lot of people's radars. So I would agree with you there.
That is a bet. So I think that'll round things out for us. If you guys enjoyed, as always, leave a like on the video. That would be very much appreciated. And if you want to stay up to date with all of our latest videos, hit that notification bell and also that subscribe button. And yeah, we're going to be talking more and more about this 2024 class as we get closer to the combine and as we get closer to draft season. So stick with us. We'll be back with plenty more content about them. I think that's all I got. Will, do you have anything else left to say to the people?
Yeah, make sure you guys check out those links down in the description below. The first one to our Discord, join that up because there's a lot of people in there talking fantasy, especially right now with all this stuff going on. We've had super active chat going on, a lot of trade talks, some orphan leagues. If you're interested in getting involved in a Dynasty league and you want to just join up with some great guys, make sure you click that link down below. And also check out our sponsors at Choice Music Group and Do Numbers. Those will be linked down below for great apparel, hoodies, music, anything you could really be looking for outside of, real stuff, the stuff I didn't list. But, yeah. If you guys made it this far into the video, as always, we love you. And we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
Peace.